It was midnight. I was driving to my town through a shortcut from the woods, and it was raining so heavily that I can barely see the road. Thinking it would be risky to continue the journey, I pulled up to wait for the rain and turned off the engine. It was completely silent. All I could hear was the rain on my car. I waited there for a while. I was already tired. My eyes were closing, and before I could realize, I dozed off. All of a sudden, a low sorrow cry coming from deep inside the woods shook me up from my nap. I stepped out of my car to check if someone was in need of help. It was very cold outside. The cry became more loud this time. It felt like it's approaching me. It sent shivers up my spine, and I felt it's no human. I jumped into the car trying to start. I was sweating and breathing heavily with a pounding heart. Luckily, the car started, and I drove off as fast as I could. The cry slowly disappeared from behind, and I hit the highway. That incident still gives me nightmares. Never ever tried to find out what it was. Everything seemed like a dream. I had to be home alone that night when my parents went to the town close by to see my grandmother that weekend. Being a fan of horror movies, I always enjoyed watching it alone as it feels more scary when no one's around. I went to bed close to midnight but couldn't fall asleep as my mind started playing games on me, and I started to remember the frightening scenes from the movie. Then I heard water dripping from the kitchen. I went down to fix it as it would be disturbing my sleep. Then I heard a knock on the main door. Thinking who the hell is visiting me at midnight, I walked closer to the door and asked, "Who is it?" It was completely silent from the other side. "You'll have to leave or I'll call the cops," I said. This time, there was a loud bang on the door, and a low husky voice from the other side said,
"I'm the plumber."
Then all of a sudden, I remembered calling the plumber afternoon to fix the tap, but he didn't show up, and why the hell is he here at this time? I told, "Go away." There was no response from the other side. I waited there for some time to confirm he's gone. I started walking back to my bedroom through the hallway, where I saw the shadow of a tall person with a hat and wearing a long coat in the kitchen. I screamed and ran to my neighbor's house for help and called the cops. They showed up in no time and found the guy in the kitchen. Surprisingly, later I found out that he was a plumber before and suffering from a mental disorder. It was winter, and my uncle, who stayed a few blocks away, wanted me to take care of Georgie that night, as he was going out of town. Georgie's mother had recently passed away because of cancer. Poor kid had a tough time coping up with it. My uncle had a collection of vintage artifacts in his house, like a huge old pendulum clock, some random paintings of old rituals depicting human sacrifice. Never did I understand his passion for these things. Georgie and I watched movies and played some video games in the hall before we went to bed. Georgie wanted to sleep in my room as he was still not over his mother's death. Everything was going fine until an incident happened that night, which still creeps me out before going to bed. I was in a deep sleep that night until I was awakened by the loud chiming of the pendulum clock. It was so loud that it felt like someone was banging it. I checked up on Georgie if he's still asleep, but for my surprise he was missing, and suddenly I could see him standing at the door and watching me. I asked, "What happened? Why are you awake?" "Why are you looking at me?" in a frightened voice. He replied, saying, "I'm not looking at you. I'm looking at the person standing next to your bed." My heart sank. I slowly turned towards the side where Georgie was pointing to. I saw no one there, and I couldn't sleep that night. Later, my uncle said Georgie has an imaginary friend that keeps him visiting at night, but my uncle ignores it. That feeling of someone standing next to your bed, watching you sleep, freaked me out. I had a tough time sleeping for a few weeks.